So just as Kim mentioned, right? If you guys have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat window. I want to make it as lively, right? Instead of me going through my slides, please do ask questions, and don't wait till the end. Also, if you want to just hold me on to a slide that I'm presenting, right? Okay, so there we go. Data protection. All right. So as we look at data protection, right, pretty much all of the different hacks or ransomware, malware attacks that we've been seeing recently, at the end of the day, it's nothing but protecting our data. These guys are after our data, right, through various channels, whether it could be an application security attack, network security attack, or your vulnerabilities that on operating system you left unpatched, right? At the end of the day, once they get through your system, they're looking for data. They're looking for the data that's critical to your organization, right? So how do you go about and protect that data? So data protection is pretty much two pillars, right? One is data security and data privacy. Data privacy usually is an org that's out of cybersecurity. It's not within cybersecurity. It's sort of data governance. And it's closely aligned with cybersecurity risk team, which is assigning risk, and they work very closely with data governance and compliance teams, right? So let's look at how data privacy should be structured before we even start implementing data security on our data, right? So within data privacy, we've got compliance regulations. So we need to be aware of, as an organization, which compliance that our organization really should we need to be compliant by. Is it GDPR? Do we have presence out of United States? CCPA is another California just passed recently, right? And their data protection compliance, right? So all of those, where is our data residing? Where is the company operating from? What are the employees you're protecting, or members, right? Member data you're protecting, need to be aware. As so that a lot of those data privacy regulations, your data governance team or compliance teams are being held responsible for those again. So that's one thing. Then regulation. What are the, if you're a healthcare, then HIPAA, financial organizations need to follow SOX regulations, right? And so on and so forth. We need to be aware of those. We need to build our data privacy around all of this, and then as an organization, we need and go either private or government organization. Do you follow NIST? Do you follow FISMA? What are the different standards do we follow, right? And as a company, we need to decide which one we're going to be following, and that will drive our entire data privacy policies. So I've got a question here before I move on to classification. I think Paul is asking, how do you align compliance and privacy requirements if the GRC and privacy team is not part of the security team? So that is a good question, and it's always a challenge in all organizations that I've seen, right? It is a collaboration, basically, at the end of the day. Compliance and privacy, they're not really their vision is not so much security driven. They would put a lot of compliance and privacy requirements based on strictly on the organization, which if it's healthcare or SOX, right? But I think there could be a collaboration. There could be meeting of the minds in the middle. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to drive our security initiatives and let them know what are the priorities here, so we can be better aligned. Do you see more states like New York, DFS put more requirements on companies? Oh yeah, I think it's coming. It's just a matter of time. I think as we see more and more these ransomware attacks and a lot of these attacks, I think in these things we are going to see a lot of states. Unfortunately, I think as we need to have more uniform requirements like GDPR as a country. But I think it's going to be a maturation phase. There will be states like California, New York. There's more and more states will come up with their own regulations. But I think we will mature into. I'm hopeful we will mature into something like GDPR at the end of the day. But in the meantime, I think we're going to have more and more states like that. So I do expect that to continue. Okay, so if no other questions on the compliance and privacy, let's move on to classification, right? So, so based on the data privacy and compliance, right? The next thing is once you know what regulations and standards you're following, and then you need to be able to define classification levels. There is PII, PHI, right? The PHI has 29 to 30 elements of PHI. Can all elements be considered into the same classification level, sensitive, secret, right? So we need to be able to define the different levels of PHI and PII and group them into different classification brackets. And other things are your IP addresses and other sensitive assets that an organization might have. How do you where do you classify them? I think these steps, going through these privacy and classification, are really critical steps before you even start applying any security initiatives on top of your data. Without knowing what you're protecting and how you want to protect them, which is the classification, right? Getting any tools, and applying any security initiatives is only going to run into a lot of problems at the end of the day. So I think classification is really key. We need to have data privacy compliance identified, what regulations we're going to follow, define your classification. Again, all of these is not a one-time work. It's sort of like an audit type of work. Yearly, you go through. There's going to be new compliance regulations come up, and so you change your policies based on that. Things like that. So this is a repetitive process that I think yearly or whatever the organization decides that we need to revisit these things. Okay, any questions before I move on to the next slide? Okay. All right. So the last piece within the data privacy, right, is a data governance, right? So this is once you have classified your data into different classification levels, secret, sensitive, whatever that you class public information, whatever that classification you decide, and what data you're going to be putting in. Next thing you would want to do is create a data lineage, right? Which is nothing but data flow mapping. That how is your sensitive data moving from one database to a web server, to a middleware server, or to an end user customer, right? How is it moving? Are we create that data flow mapping and different touch points that it's going through? So that will give you a comfort as to where you're storing your data, where your jewels, crown jewels are being stored, or even in temporary memory space, right? How are they moving across? So that's data lineage. Data tagging is then if you want to get to the detail at the field and data field level within databases, or even in unstructured data, you can start tagging your data and assigning the classification with it. So these are some of the work that your data governance team would be doing. It's really critical, I think, in this day and age to have a good data flow mapping created so you can apply your security initiatives on top of it. So I see a couple of questions here. So this is interesting. How would you classify PCI requirements? So yeah, so again, PCI, Pratik, PCI is again, one within a financial industry, it's more common, right? It's just like any SOX is one of the requirements. That PCI is the transaction within credit card. So if your organization is one of those banking industry or any retail industry, you should be compliant to PCI requirements, and it would be just one of those requirements. And next, what is PHI? So PHI is more into the health industry, protected health information, right? So your member data, like I've got insurance, and so all health insurance companies are required to protect all of their member health information, which until now, I think until a few years back, cybersecurity was really, really, lacking into the health industry, your hospitals, health insurance, doctor offices, and things of this nature. And lately, in the last few years, we've seen a lot of those health data being stolen out of hospitals and doctor offices and insurance, right? And they're being used to not only do the ransomware attacks, but they can also, member data is being used. People are using other member data based on what their health records say. They can go and use their ID to get medicines on behalf of them. So just like stealing your social security number and getting your credit, they are now using health information to get through that health for their own, the hackers. And they're selling this. A lot of these are being sold in the black market, so to speak. How does your organization split the roles and duties between privacy and security? As a CISO, do you have CPO too? No. Well, we do have a CPO as an organization. We do have a CPO. Unfortunately, yes, both of these they both don't report up to the same management. I mean, ultimately, we all report to CEO, right? But CPO in our organization reports up to CEO, CISO reports up to CIO, right? And so there's always going to be that little bit of disconnect between privacy and security. I think as we've seen this rise in a lot of attacks these days, privacy has now becoming more and more aligned with security. As we go through some of the initiatives later in the slides, I will explain you how privacy can help you manage some of these initiatives, especially when it comes to data loss prevention, right? Privacy has a big say in it. I'll explain you on that. Anything else? Those are some good questions. Thank you. Thank you. Next slide. So we talked about data privacy. Now we talked about compliance and classification and data governance, which is where now you build your data flow mapping, right? You tagged your data, right? So how do you protect that data? You know where your crown jewels are. You know how they're moving across your infrastructure, right? And you put the classification also. And so one of the key things we always talk about is encryption, right? So there's two things within encryption that we need to be aware of. Data at rest encryption is it's the nowadays a lot of cloud vendors like AWS by default they offer disk level encryption, right? That is great to have. Disk level encryption is good to have, but that only protects the data if somebody was to steal your disk, right? These days, that is becoming harder and harder because these data centers are pretty well, physical security is pretty well maintained over there. So data at rest encryption, there's another piece to it, which is you lay on top of. So there are a few companies out there that offer file system type of encryption, right? So you can encrypt all your databases or structured or unstructured data. So once you've done your data lineage discovery, data discovery, you know where the crown jewels are, you know where your PHI, PII information is. You go and apply those data at rest encryption. What that does is that comes with a policy where you can assign which processes and which users are allowed to decrypt that data, right? Basically, so even if we have a user who gets into our database, but if they're not part of that policy, they will be blocked at that. They won't be able to see the clear text in that. Data in transit encryption is basically making sure that once you build your data lineage, right, you know how your data is sensitive data is moving across from one end to other end. Then we can go back and then identify, are we using any unsecure protocol? Do we have HTTP enabled anywhere? Are we still using FTP or are we sending any of our critical sensitive data in clear text, right? This will help us go back and enable encryption. Data in transit encryption is pretty, I would say it could be code dependent. So we may have to go back and change our application, right? So that is probably the data in transit encryption is a tough process because we need to work with solution architecture, our application architects to understand how the applications are built and whether enabling, SSL or whatever, any secure protocol would break an application or not. So the data at rest is, I think, pretty straightforward. In transit, it could be a time consuming depending on, if you have a good collaboration from different application teams. Okay. Manisha, I'll come back to your question in a minute. Let me finish this stuff on this slide and we'll come back to your question. Next thing is, so we've now applied static and in transit encryption. Next thing is static and dynamic masking, right? So what you want to make sure is you're not taking your production data into the lower environment, right? So you want to build a static masking algorithm where you're masking your production data and moving into development environment where developers are testing against it. So their developers, they don't have the rules to be able to view sensitive data, right? And so they shouldn't be. And I think static masking does help with that. Dynamic masking is more of, right, when you log into your bank accounts, or you're only displayed your last 4 digits of social security number, right? So that's dynamic masking, and that depends on your organization needs. So if a DBAs or system admins have privileged access to database, right, and they go and log into the database, should they be able to view the table that has all the SSN, right? Should that SSN be masked for DBAs? DBAs don't they shouldn't be allowed to view your sensitive data, right? Again, when we build our data lineage, right, we know where the data is sitting at. We tagged our data, and so we now know which tables have SSN or sensitive data. You can put dynamic masking, so your privileged users now are not able to see any of the sensitive information, right? And tokenization is nothing but, again, it's a sort of encryption masking technology, and it's becoming very popular these days. So it could be used in junction with either masking or, you can get rid of masking and just use tokenization also. So go back to here, Manisha, to your question. Ownership and stewardship of data is usually a problem seen in many organizations. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah, good question. Yeah, so ownership of the data is pretty much, we as cybersecurity, we don't own data, right? It's the business user application teams that own data, right? We are there to protect the data. So a lot of times, yes, there is a challenge, right? Because as a data owner, they don't, business owners don't like, are not always receptive. I shouldn't say don't like, but they're not always receptive to all these regulations and security initiatives we're putting on top of the data, right? So at the end of the day, right, it's about explaining them that their data is being protected by this. We're not trying to here slow. Obviously, any of these technologies like encryption, masking, that we're going to put overhead onto the application. We're going to put some sort of slowness, but explaining them the necessity of these security initiatives, right? Putting on top of their data, and why is it critical? Once they have that critical understanding, I think they are pretty receptive to it. Ownership, again, cybersecurity shouldn't get into the business of ownership, because we don't, as cybersecurity people, we don't understand the applications as well, and we don't want to get into the ownership of the data. We should be in the business of protecting the data. We should leave the ownership to the application team, business users who actually are generating that data. They are working day and night with that data. So that's where I stand on that. Any questions? That's fine. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the second pillar into the data security is building a good data loss prevention, right? So this is where I see a big, let me see, before I start into this, there's a question from Yash. Have you come across application performance impact after applying change data at rest and data in transit encryption? Yes. So on an average, yes, you are, depending on which, there are multiple vendors, whether you use native encryption from databases like DB2, MS SQL, Oracle, right? You use native encryption, or you go with a third-party vendors that provide these services at data at rest. There will be about 3 to 5% of degradation, right? You would anything more than 10% is probably not. I haven't seen it, although in some cases we run into issues like that. But those have been. We were able to fix it. There was some minor configuration on the database side that DBAs had to tweak it. So we've been able to stay within 3 to 5%. Data in transit has also a little bit of overhead, going from HTTP to HTTPS, right? There's slight overhead, not not much. Again, you can work with your capacity and performance engineering team, collect all the metrics, right, and go about increasing CPU memory or whatever those metrics you're seeing is causing the slowdown, right? Hope that answered your question, Yash. Okay. All right. So going into DLP, right? So DLP is one area that I previously mentioned that we would see a joint effort coming from privacy and legal, because at the end of the day, we're scanning our employees' outbound email, right? So when you scan email based on our data classification, right, we've now identified what do we want to protect. Is it social security number? Is it member ID? Is it, all the different elements that we're trying to protect that are going outbound, right? So when you apply data loss prevention and any incidents are triggered, right? Obviously, now that email, the body of that email is now created as an incident, and DLP admins or people that are working on this DLP incidents, they can view the email, they can possibly view people's private information, right? So that's where your privacy, your legal team comes into play. Your employees have to be the people that are working on DLP should be on a yearly basis go through background check, because while we're trying to protect this, we can't have our internal employees, DLP admins, be the people that can bypass these security policies, right? Because they have now access to all of these outgoing scans, whether it's network traffic scan, people sending data through FTP, FTPS, SFTP, right? Or USB downloads. People are on your laptop. If you're downloading, if you are allowed to, first of all, USB should be locked. But there are business reasons where users are on exception list, right, to be able to download data. So before you're downloading, you got to make sure that it's encrypted, disk is encrypted, and then be able to scan that data. What data are they downloading, right? And if it's one of those sensitive data they're downloading, then you need to build policies at certain threshold. You block that download. You don't let it go, right? And so some of these different channels of DLP is, you scan your structured data, unstructured data. So on a quarterly to yearly basis, you should go back to your lower environment where you masked your data, right? And scan those lower environments just in case. People have bypassed that masking and put the real production data into lower environment. So running that quarterly scans or once a year scans would identify any of the database have any production data on it or not, right? DLP usually, until 4 or 5 years back, DLP used to be based on regular expression, right? So if you're looking for a social security number, you could say, look for any 9-digit number, right? Or 9-digit number with dashes in it, or, whatnot. What that used to do was that used to create a lot of false positives. Because, any 9-digit number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 would be considered as a social security number, or any model numbers, any serial numbers that you're sending to your vendor, right? And if it's got 9-digit number, it would. So a lot of these false positives used to be about 4 or 5 years back, and creating a good DLP program was a nightmare, because a lot of times 80 to 90% of your incidents were false positives. Now there is you can do exact data matching, where you can, a lot of companies, a lot of DLP tools come with capability to where you can scan your production database and create a hash of your SSN or member ID or whatever that you're trying to protect, right? So now any email that goes out down, it scans against that your production database and sees if there is an exact match. If there is an exact match, then it creates that as an incident. So so definitely things have gotten much better on the DLP side with the introduction of these technologies. And there are some decent companies that offer that these tools also. Question from Paul. Recommendations for DLP when data doesn't flow regex, example, names, mails. So Paul, I think if I'm understanding you, your question is more about what I already mentioned about exact data matching, right? And can you elaborate if I'm not understanding the question? Okay. I'll wait for your, but I think, Paul, the exact data matching will actually be helpful. We've seen much better results with using and going away with regex. Regex still has some value. Regex still, because what happens in exact data matching is also not a perfect science, right? You're now possibly you're looking at a limited set of data, unless you have scanned all of your production data and be 100% sure you have the 100% inventory of your right. And so that is a tough thing to manage, because as we know, shadow IT, a lot of our companies and organizations have stuff sitting around that we don't know. Getting the full inventory is sometimes, and building a good asset management is always a challenge. So, but I think on and all, I think using a EDM exact data matching is much better than regex, because it stops a lot of false positives. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next pillar on the data security is IAM, right? So now we applied encryption. We started monitoring our outbound traffic, right? But there's still most of the incidents are still happening internal. Internal users are causing a lot of these incidents. So having a good identity access management policies, right? Access and fine-grained authorization, given people only the limited role-based authorization, and a lot of times dynamic authorization, right? So just in time or on need basis, and that only lasts for 4 or 5 hours or 8 hours, right? So building a good IAM program is key to data security. If we don't have a good IAM program or managed properly, and we leave user IDs out there for a while, that it doesn't matter what kind of encryption you do. If a user was allowed to decrypt and their jobs got changed, now if you didn't remove those permissions, right, it doesn't matter. You have encryption. If you don't have a good IAM program, you're leaving the holes wide open. So having a good IAM program and revisiting those with UAR. UAR is nothing but user access reviews quarterly. We should be doing all the user access reviews, getting certifications from their manager that these users still need those authorizations is an important piece of identity access management. Let me go back to this question here. Denise is asking, any recommendations on DLP training for global employees? So DLP training I think that should be part of your security awareness program, right? We should each and every employee should know that we should not be sending any as an organization, whatever the policies you have implemented, that you cannot send any SSN outbound, any customer data outbound. They should know about it. So that should be part of your security awareness program, I think. And any initiatives that you build on top of it, whether it's USB downloads and things like that, should be also part of the security awareness. What I've seen a lot of organizations do is they create SOPs around a lot of these policies and tools and services, and they and cybersecurity organizations, they do once a year they review all of these policies with organization as an audience. So they do lunch and learn. I've been in an organization where we've done lunch and learn. We've gone through all the cybersecurity policies that are currently in operations, right? And so we invite people from all business users, and it's sort of so that worked, but that wasn't always 100% because it's up to people to join. If you make it through mandatory once a year security awareness type of training, I think that actually hits and that works much better. Okay. Next, so now we've done identity access management program, right? And so now, but what we still have is privileged users. We still have DBAs that still have access to databases. We still have system admins who have root privileges or admin privileges, right? Or application admins who have higher privileges on these applications, right? So we got to be able to monitor their activities. Even after we put dynamic masking, right? We need to be able to monitor our DBAs to make sure that what they're doing is within their rules, and not only within their rules, but within the change window that the change management team has approved. Why is it critical? Because that sort of falls with the user behavioral. Somebody who's trying to steal a data, an internal employee, likely is not going to go through a change management process. It's going to go and log in and steal data, right? So anytime you see a change into database happening, that should be alerted and correlated with the change management tickets like Service Manager, ServiceNow, right? And there are tools that integrate with ServiceNow. So if there is a change somebody went and ran some SQL commands on a particular database, right? That generates an incident on that tool. It then correlates with Service Manager. And if there's a ticket associated with that database and that user, that DBA, then it's an allowed activity. Otherwise, there's an incident created. So things of this nature, we can implement privileged user activity monitoring, right? To monitor our users and their activities. Right. Any questions on that? Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So I think we're coming to the end of this presentation, and this is nothing but a brief of what we already talked here, right? We go through classification and discovery, which is your, classifying is based on compliance and regulations. And discovery is data governance. You discover data, you create data lineage, data flow mapping, right? Tag the data. You then apply the right IAM policies on it, on the data that's being tagged. Apply encryption, mask that data or tokenize it, right? Then you go through DLP policies and schedule scans. So you keep making sure that your lower environment still does not have any PHI information, right? And then, you go through monitoring and alerting. This is a key piece, right? A lot of times we build monitoring just by forwarding the logs to our SIEM. But if we don't have good use cases and good alerts built in, that sort of monitoring does nobody good. It helps in backtracking. Once there's an incident, we can backtrack through logs, but we need to be able to create alerts so they can be acted upon right away, right? And some of the things like, that should lay on top of these to protect your data. At the end of the day, vulnerability management is pretty critical, right? So we make sure that our vulnerabilities are patched on our operating system, our databases, right? Our network security is our parameters are patched, and right firewall policies and firewalls are being audited every year. Application security vulnerabilities are being patched also. So our database, our applications do not have vulnerabilities that hackers can get into our databases, right? So all of these different domains of cybersecurity sit on top of it. But at the end of the day, anybody who's trying to do damage to your organization is looking for this data. And the only way we can protect that data is to know where our crown jewels are, discover it, tag it, and apply the right security policies and encryption, and then start monitoring through DLP and SIEM and create alerts on it. So that is pretty much my end of my presentation. Any questions at this point?
Okay. Nish, it looks like that was more of an interactive presentation, which I absolutely love. My producer is feeding any questions. I'll wait and see if she puts anything in there because I don't have the platform open. But I do want to let everyone know that Nish has been a big supporter of our FutureCon events. He's attended many of our events. And I hope if you guys go up to the network lounge, you can actually see Nish's profile and send him any messages if you have any more questions, because those actually go to your inbox if you happen to not be on the show. But that was excellent. I love when we really get technical with our audience like that, and we that doesn't always happen, that we have so many questions like that. So excellent job, Nish. So if people want to find you besides the network lounge, where it's the best place, I would imagine LinkedIn.
Yep, LinkedIn. Definitely send me a connection and I will connect with you guys. And I like to talk data security to everything. So any domains you're involved in, you're passionate about, connect with me and we'll talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nish Majmudar. I probably messed it up that time.
No, Kim, you got it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting our events. We know that all the CISOs out there are so busy. Thanks for everything you're doing for the organizations out there and continuing to keep everything as safe as can be. So thank you so much.